Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Single Muslim Live here on British Muslim TV, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com. I'm Fahima Mohammed, your host and relationship coach. A very warm welcome to all of you and from all of us here on British Muslim TV, wherever you're watching, whether it's on Sky Channel 752, Facebook or Twitter. We love to hear all of your comments and queries, as that's why we raise these kind of topics every week on the show. And we do listen to you, and we would love to also hear your views tonight. If you wish to do so, you may call in directly to the studio, dialing 01924231083. Please do ask the bill payer's permission, as standard network rates do apply. You can also message me privately, and I'll keep you anonymous if you wish, on our free WhatsApp service, and that number is 07585835150. Again, we have another topic tonight with regards to how to deal with skeletons in our closet. I think it's really interesting, and we haven't really discussed this before, with regards to going into a new relationship, having a past. We all have something that we would like to sort of maybe hide, or we're not proud of, or we just don't want to have, our future partner, maybe, discuss or maybe even be aware of. Now, that is a huge, huge topic. And with me tonight, we have a very special guest, very, very qualified to address this. And he's with me tonight. Please do help me welcome Dr. Sarfraz Jarraj. Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Walaikum salam. I'm very good, thank you. Pleased to be here.
I am absolutely really, really happy to have you tonight, because I know how important this topic is. And it was something that we came up together with, because I think that we don't really address this. And, you've got so much experience, and I do admire your work. But just for the viewers tonight, please describe what you do, and hopefully we'll, start the conversation afterwards.
Thanks, Fahima. Well, I got a few different hats that might be relevant to the topic that we're discussing today. So professionally, I work as a clinical psychologist in the NHS, and I work to help people with mental health difficulties. That includes kind of the factors associated with mental health, like relationships. I also teach in the Department of Psychology as a senior lecturer at the University of Surrey. And aside from that, I run a number of marriage-related courses in the Muslim community, and facilitate different types of workshops, and also do mediation work and matchmaking work in the community as well.
Wow, a perfect guest tonight, actually. I never realized. Amazing. I am so, so pleased to have you today. We actually are very, very lucky to have you tonight, actually. And listening to what you do, mashallah, I am just really, really proud to have someone like you in the community. We do value, people like yourself, and to have you with your insights, it's so, so relevant. Now, when we talk about skeletons in our closet, what does that even mean? Let's just go into defining what that means, because a lot of us might have a different definition.
Yeah, I mean, it is a pretty sort of colloquial term, and I guess the connotation that might go with skeletons is they're kind of old things that we might want to be hiding, and that's why we stick them in a closet. They're not there for display. And I guess, in a relationship context, what we're really talking about are those parts of our experience that maybe we don't feel too comfortable talking about, maybe shouldn't be talked about, and hopefully we can unpack that a little bit more today.
Do you think, though, when you're young and you're first starting off looking for a relationship, that you might get away with those sort of like maybe secrets? Or do you think that still plays a part, and a sort of like a character assassination of somebody if they did come from a bad past? Because, some communities, especially in the Muslim community, they do feel that they want to find out about someone's past before they get married, and they go to different people to actually get that sort of character reference. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, okay, we know that if there was another relationship that was broken down and it's quite obvious and they learn from it, and sometimes, there's a difference within gender. Sometimes men get away with it a lot more than women do, and they are scorned for a name, for divorce, for example. And if you're young and you made a mistake, depending on that mistake, there's so much that I've just asked you right now. So give me your thoughts on that, because I really do feel that we don't address and look at this, especially when, is it right to ask someone for that kind of reference?
Wow, so you just hit me with a whole bunch of questions there. I'm going to approach it from the first point you raised about young people. and what we should or shouldn't be saying or asking about with young people. And I don't think there's necessarily a difference whether you're younger or older. I mean, from one perspective, when you're younger, it may be more acceptable to have made mistakes. Maybe you've had less time to make mistakes. When you get older, maybe you're considered to be wiser, but you've had more opportunities to make mistakes. So I think how much it matters depends a lot more on the person who's asking. And hopefully through today's show, we can get a better idea about not what is asked or what people want to ask, but what should be asked. What's most important in the context of developing a successful, stable, and strong marriage?
Well, you've just really gone into the point that you should really be answering next by answering those questions that you've just ended up saying. So what should we be asking? And, how should we be asking that?
Now, for me, even this starting point is not where we should be. We need to rewind a little bit further and be asking, what is it I am? What is it I want? What is it I should be or want to be before I start asking those questions of someone else? And I think one of the most fundamental things that we can start preparing as individuals is being clear about, am I even ready for this? Like, what qualifies me to now enter into a really responsible, serious relationship that will be hopefully full of lots of fun and love, but there is a dead serious side to this. And I guess it can go two ways. I know a number of people that I speak to, and this seems to affect guys more than girls at a younger age, particularly in the 20s, is the guy is being like, I don't know if I'm ready for marriage. I don't know if I'm ready. They'll ask me, how did you know? Like, how do people know when they're ready? And I think there's an element of, you don't know that you're ready until you're into it. If you wait for that absolute security, the absolute conviction, you could be waiting decades. And I'd just like to bring in a bit of a psychological metaphor, if I may. So this on another channel, Fahima, you ever watch Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Of course.
Yeah. So, the host, asks the contestant a question, gives them four options. Let's say the contestant says, I'll go for B. Now, what does the host normally respond with?
I haven't watched the show in a while. It's like, are you sure? Do you,
exactly.
sort of like, are you sure?
Are you sure? Yeah. So now the contestant will be like, I think it's B.
Yeah, they doubt themselves. Yeah.
That's it, the doubt. And the host will be like, oh, do you want to go for a 50-50? You want to ask a friend? Every response the host has further erodes the conviction that individual contestant started with. And that psychological process goes on for too many people when they're thinking about, am I ready? Am I ready? Am I ready? And every time you ask that question, you're just eroding your own confidence. And there's an element that you're never going to find out if you're ready until you're in it. Now, that's
I guess, that is definitely one end. And as you were speaking at the very beginning, actually, what came to mind is exactly that, the external factors. But the external factors, I think, that comes into play, especially in our society, is not necessarily what the questions you were asking, am I ready? Am I responsible? It's more about, do you have the finances? It's these other external expectations that are put upon us, whether it's even from society and parents. And that's what we are brought up believing, that, once you have that bank balance, that mortgage, and, your particular age, it doesn't matter, then that's what gets you ready. But really, we've realized that over time, that is definitely not the way of looking at, relationships and being ready. So, what are the questions then? Because even when you're looking at yourself, when you're young, and a lot of times we know that in our faith, we are encouraged to marry young. We don't even know ourselves and we're still growing. So it's quite a lot of pressure. And nowadays we're finding that people are very scared. And there's pressure on both women and men for them to be married young. And obviously for the women, because, we have a biological clock. And at the same time, the young men are like, well, I cannot provide all of this at 22, 23, 24, what you're asking for. So let's be realistic. realistic about that. So how fair is it that we are now in a society where there is delays in marriage and there's also lots of breakdowns in marriages? Do you think that, you know, there's certain factors that we need to address in order to maybe alleviate some of those sort of breakdowns?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, some of those external factors, you know, tend to have this theme around finance.
Mm-hmm.
And finance is necessary for security, but it's the level of finance and how we're going to get to that level of security that I think is worth reinvestigating. And when, you know, in terms of asking ourselves, what I think one way of knowing that you're ready is that you're able to start having these conversations with yourself and the sort of people that you might be looking to get married to, that you want to enter into a relationship, which is, have I got a plan? Not do I have to have executed everything and achieved
Mm.
all those goals? Because actually they're the barakah. I mean, you know, we're here on the Single Muslim channel, you know, talking about what's relevant for the context for a Muslim, and your level of tawakkul, your level of faith that actually, if I enter into a holy matrimony, that itself is going to bring barakah. That's going to accelerate the success towards my plan. So if I'm taking on all the responsibilities, I've got to make it myself, but I'm not going to put any faith in my Lord. I'm not going to put faith in the barakah of my relationship. I've already started off undermining that.
Absolutely. I love that point. I think it's really powerful, actually. And a lot of us do neglect that. And we practice faith with the rituals, but not necessarily with the actually having the belief. Because if that was the case, then we would actually have that in action when we are making decisions as big as this for our entire life. But I do find that our community is more cultural based when it comes to relationships. What's your thoughts on that?
Of the cultural expectations, I think can be really helpful. Some of them can be very detrimental. Now,
Okay, we'll leave it on that because we are coming into a break. And I did actually think, you know what, you probably answer that much, much more in depth when we come back, because I think it's something we do need to look into. Because like you said, on one hand, it can be quite helpful. On the other, it cannot be. So we are definitely going to address that. And inshallah, you please do stay with me because it's really only getting started here. And I would love for you to tune back in, and inshallah, we will continue the conversation with our guest tonight. And we will see you in a few moments. Please do not go away. Stay exactly where you are. See you soon. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Single Muslim Live here on British Muslim TV, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com. Having a very, very interesting conversation with a very, very qualified guest tonight. So please take advantage. We have our doctor in the house tonight in discussing how to deal with skeletons in our closet, which I think is so relevant for relationships. Dr. Sarfraz, we were talking earlier before the break with regards to how culture can sometimes interfere or actually be positive when actually dealing with kind of, you know, relationship issues, and especially our past, because a lot of us as humans generally, as you know, being a clinical psychologist, that we do judge, and we do actually, as much as we should give those, you know, 60 excuses and benefit of doubt, when it comes to marriage, it doesn't necessarily end up that way, right? And you did mention also having the faith and the tawakkul and things like that, but when we come to marriage, we want it all written down and we want all those boxes ticked, and those boxes now are getting very, very like I don't know how to describe it. It's getting much more higher in expectation. So what's your thoughts when it comes to culture? How can we use it to our benefit, and where's there a danger?
Well, I think there are a number of values that we might find in our culture that, you know, are really ethically based, that can really be helpful in guiding some of our own decision making, our sense of readiness, our sense of expectation, and what to get out of a relationship. And I guess just picking out one key example, which I think sometimes either gets you know, misunderstood or mislabeled, is the value of family that we have in culture. And I think one of the ways that links into you know, the decision-making process for marriage is the discussion of, you know, am I just looking for like a hot, funny guy, or am I also looking for the father of my children? Yeah. Am I just looking for like a really sweet, caring, adventurous wife, or am I also looking for the mother of my children? And I think that's another part of your sort of emotional and intellectual maturity.
Do you think parents
Related
are
to your
raising
wedding.
their children to be mothers, and future dads, though? That's the issue I always find that we need to question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a deeper issue here within cultures around how we might sometimes infantilize our children. Some of the power games that get played out.
Yes.
The overly strong patriarchy that can exist. The way the relationships we have with our children that continue to infantilize them, and that cycle plays out. So they're not allowed to have that sort of level of emotional development that would equip them to be having these sorts of conversations and making the wiser decisions.
What do you see are the major changes in today's day and age? Because now we have obviously the newer generation, living in the West and adapting it more. And obviously, I find that some parents can be quite lenient, thinking that, we had it so rough, so we're going to go easy on our kids, and it doesn't necessarily serve them. And then we have the opposite, where they're trying to be so strict to maintain that culture, which also does not work. So where do we find that balance, and how do we get that balance? Because that's where, the new generation can be quite confused as to either, be so much, in fear and try to be strict themselves and hate it. And the other one might just completely go away. And at the end of the day, then they don't really want to even follow that faith. And I think that's also because they also judge. I find that when you put yourself out there as a Muslim, and especially as women, if you wear hijab, you're seen as one, there's a certain expectation. And I know that personally as well, being seen, there's an expectation in the public eye, but, you may not follow suit. So where do we sort of draw the line when it comes to dealing with our skeletons in our closets, in a sense that, how much do we actually need to reveal about our past, and should we reveal it to our future partner?
I mean, like I think, going back to the balance, starting from the parent-child relationship and then how that goes into the adult relationship when it comes to developing a relationship and disclosing. I mean, that balance by its nature is tricky. And, I find that there's too much of, the good old days of this generation and this generation. To be honest, every generation for the generation before is a new generation. So there's nothing like too standoutish about it as a concept. Now, the idea of being too strict or too relaxed, can also reflect, and I hope, for parents listening to this, reflect the transference from the parents. That if they're feeling like they were too strictly handled, they might overcompensate by being too sort of free and liberal and not enforcing,
Yes.
healthy boundaries. And it can go the other way. So I think there's something about balance there anyway. Now, regardless of, the influence of the parents, there's going to be a societal influence. And we do recognize that we are increasing, in the time that we're in, to more exposure to sort of hypersexualization, for example, in the images we see, TV, social media, etc. And that's going to have an effect on our expectations. It's going to have an effect on our behaviors, and it's probably going to have an effect on our vulnerability to make mistakes and things like that. And like you acknowledged at the start of the program, we're all fallible. We're all going to have some sort of skeleton. And I guess if I just break down maybe some of the sort of categories of skeleton.
Yes.
So there may be misdeeds, mistakes you've made. And I'm just going to pick out a couple of the common ones that I hear about from people that I often work with. So drugs and alcohol. Now, as a Muslim, it's not the done thing. It is considered a sin. And it's incredibly common in the Muslim community. Various sort of surveys that really just scratch the surface tell us that actually the majority of young people have at some stage, in the Muslim community, have tried drugs or alcohol, and many may be using on a regular basis. Now, is that the sort of thing to share? Now, we'll come back to that because I just want to look at a couple of other categories of this, the sort of the misdeeds, the mistakes, those wrongs that we might commit in the past that qualify as skeletons. So relationships. Now, what if you've been in a legit relationship, a halal relationship, you've done your nikah and it didn't work out and you're divorced? Is that a skeleton in your closet? And that may extend to even having children in a previous relationship. Then, I guess, linked to that is illicit relationships. Have you been in a relationship before? Is that something I should be telling my partner or potential partner to be? And if so, when do I tell them? So I guess I just wanted to share some insights into this that take into account some of the ethics of what you do, but also some of the practical impact that some of these decisions on what you do and don't disclose may have.
I think those were fundamental, the main things, and I think I'm really, really happy that you've shared that, because those are the main concerns that people do want to consider when they're going into a relationship, and they want to know that person's past with regards to that. Regardless if they share it or not, they do wonder. And I also do feel there is also a slight bias, because as even if we don't like to admit it, our boys can get away with that, but the girls won't.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's something that we also need to address, that the same mistake done by a woman is definitely not looked upon as the same way as with a man, whether they're young or old, and especially even how that relationship ended. Even if a man, for example, cheats, okay, again, a lot of the times it's the blame is on the woman regardless of the action. So there is a lot to consider here. But then again, if a person was to even cheat, are they ever looked upon as someone who is going to be reliable or trustworthy in the future? Because we find that in majority of the time, I know it's changing, but it's the male that normally does, have those sort of like illicit relationships. But I know I've heard that it is changing, unfortunately, where women are also in that same predicament. So how do you then, when you've now addressed those kind of reasons where people will probably feel that that is a skeleton in a closet, how do they unpack it themselves, let alone feel the need or not the need to share? And isn't it a risk if they don't share it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I just want to acknowledge, what you were saying about the cultural difference that there is, but emphasize that actually that there is nothing religiously different about whether a man or a woman were to. I guess there is something about chastity, which seems to be emphasized for women, but that doesn't seem to be as culturally emphasized for men. But that's no reflection of the religious or the faith-based perspective on it. But let's play it out now. And the reason I'm going to just discuss this in as sort of guidelines is because I think there is an idiosyncrasy to any situation. You have to take into account who's the person asking, who's the person telling, and what the situation is. So there isn't a one size fits all, but hopefully there are a few principles that we can start drawing on. Now, first, quick question for you, Fahima, if you don't mind. Does honesty equal trust?
Wow, that is a wide question. To me, it can do. It can do, yes.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing the subtlety and the nuance. So it's not as straightforward. It's not a simple equation. Like, yes, if you're really honest, you can be trustworthy, because honesty comes with responsibility. Honesty comes with subtlety. Honesty comes with wisdom. Yeah. And so I think that's a principle I want to bring in here, is that when we're being honest, how much detail is necessary and not necessary. Now, one of the links back to this is if the starting point is the self, have I been honest with myself, and have I come to terms with my own mistakes? Have I experienced remorse? Have I discussed my mistakes in relation to my creator? Have I had those conversations with my creator? Now, if I can do that, there's something happening at the heart level, which is going to allow me to reflect to change my behavior so that I don't. If I haven't had those conversations, it's not going to be authentic in the same way. And I'm much more likely to start playing games in how I cover for myself and justify what I've done. And if and when that comes up in the relationship, that lack of honesty and gamesmanship is going to blow up and destroy the relationship.
I love that principle, but we are coming into another break very shortly, and we're going to continue with that. And I've just made quite a few notes as you were speaking, because a lot came to mind, but I love what you've said. And I think this is such a valuable episode tonight. Please do stay tuned. We will be back to continue the conversation, and you can be part of that. We'll see you in a few moments. Don't go away. And inshallah, we'll see you shortly. Take care. Salam. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Single Muslim Live here on British Muslim TV, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com. Again, we were talking before the break with regards to, dealing with the skeletons in our closet, how to address it, and how do we share certain things from our past. And I think it's really vital that we do understand ourselves, as our doctor was mentioning, in order to be able to be comfortable with dealing with our past first ourselves, and then understanding that if it was to be shared, there is also a risk. But then the thing is, you have to also understand that that outcome may not be what you necessarily expect, because the other person, it could be a deal breaker, and you've got to be prepared for that too, because sometimes you never know someone. And I always say this on almost all my shows, that people do not like, or they do not know how to have uncomfortable conversations because they're so scared that that's going to end the relationship. But if you go on without those conversations at the very beginning, it's the same reason why most of the time is the breakdown even after years later. So how vital it is to find out first off. And I know that it's so difficult to find the one, and when you do, you want to hold on tight. But when you do, there are principles like you're mentioning and processes that you need to put in place to have certain difficult things. And it's not about just looking forward, it's also addressing your past. Now, again, it can be a deal breaker when it comes to sharing your past, and you feel that I've done something, and if it was a secret and no one knows about it, you might get away with it, fair enough. But if you know that it may come out from somebody else, how is it that you need to address it with somebody else? Like, how would you prepare somebody to go through that process in order for them to also understand it could really dishearten them, and it might actually make them never share again for the next relationship? So it's really, really important how we deal with this. How do you sort of advise someone in that way?
That's a really important question for us to grapple with well in advance of being in that situation, so we can reflect on what are the pros and cons and how this is done. Often sharing itself isn't the problem, it's how things are shared, and when they're shared that can become problematic. So I think as a general principle, you don't want to start off a conversation with someone saying, hey, you know what, before we get into this, I got to come clean. That's, you're not giving the person a chance to get to know you and who you really are. Now, part of your past may be who you were. And I think that's an important part of your identity that you need for that person to understand about you is, who are you now? What are your qualities? What are your convictions? What are your values? What are your disciplines now? And I think once you've established enough of a trusting relationship where you feel comfortable saying a little bit more about yourself, and that person, and you feel there's a level of confidence that person really is connected and understands who you are now, then being clear, finding the right time and being clear about your intention for why you want to share what you want to share. And I guess trying to be careful about, is this transactional? Am I just telling you because you might find out from one of my frenemies, who might switch on me? Am I just telling you to protect myself from what might come out on social media if you look hard enough?
Or yes, I was going to go to that.
Right. Or in terms of my intention, am I telling you because I really care about you, and I want to be open with you, and I'm happy to be vulnerable with you, and I want to give you the chance to say, you know what, you can't take this forward with me because it crosses too many lines for you. And
I
doing
love
it
that
because you care
questioning.
about that person, not because you're worried about getting caught out, I think is
Yeah.
fundamental.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think, the way you said about having the intention as to why you want to share and having that care for the other person, that is so amazing that if someone could think like that, it might even come out and be related in a particular way just because you're thinking and feeling in that way. And people don't realize that communication comes out from the inside. So when you have a good intention, that communication can be a lot sweeter and they can get a much better response, much authentic because you're being organic as well. So I think that's so vital. People don't really, demonstrate that kind of way of thinking and being. So I think what you've shared there is so important. And, I never really thought it like that, but you put it so beautifully. And I think that, most people today will probably feel a little bit of relief from their past, knowing that if that's the sort of intention, then, whatever even happens, because you're going in there with the right intention, you would actually even accept that outcome because maybe that person is really not ready for you or accepting you, or they're willing to go on a journey with you and, move forward. Again, when it comes to dealing with and telling your partner, now, a lot of the times you feel that it's okay just to share between you and them, but we do have an issue as well that they may go and tell their parents, they may go tell their friends. You see, it's not just between the two parties, and that could create a lot more of that sort of whisper and that external sort of like sort of dialogue of what other people's opinions are. So how important it is as well for when two people are getting to know each other to kind of keep things where they are mature enough to sort of keep those secrets. But at the same time, if they are concerned and they're like, I need to share this with my parents because I know they're not going to approve, there is a fine line, don't you think?
No, absolutely. And I mean, there is, a view from our faith-based perspective that what you've done is really between you and your Lord. Yeah. So if we're absolute about that, then you don't say nothing to nobody. But we've just said that actually there's something about building trust between you. There's something about your honesty with wisdom that means that actually you may self-disclose something of your past experiences. Now, I said, it's also not just what you disclose, it's how you disclose it. And I think that talking about detail is totally unnecessary. And actually, what hopefully viewers can consider here is that it's not just the person telling, it's the person asking. If you're there listening to someone who's opening their heart to you, what's your intention of asking for more detail? Are you trying to shame them? Are you trying to find the negative in them? Are you aware of the hurt that you're potentially digging around for? Or can you accept that actually it's good enough for me that this person's opened their heart to say, they have erred and they've learned from their mistakes, they've reflected on what's happened, and they're assuring me that that's not going to happen in our relationship, because that's all you need to know. You don't need to know the gory details. You don't need to know whether this person was smoking weed or whether they were smoking hash or how many joints. That level of detail is unnecessary.
But is that fair though? Is that fair to say? Because if it was an addiction, like you mentioned, sometimes addictions can be, can come up again. So you need to obviously understand what you're setting yourself up for to a certain extent as well. And the other sort of dynamic is, I know, especially in the Arab community, before they get married, they do ask the person, the potential spouse, give me a few names that I can go to so that I can find out about you, or they will ask, on, your behalf of, their daughter or their son, this character, is he good? Is he not good? They'll go to maybe an imam or a scholar, or they'll go to maybe a family friend who is quite well known, so that they want to get that sort of like, security of knowing who they're getting into their family to either look after their daughter, or who is going to marry, their son. So again, that's also another thing. Like, if you know something about that person, like, should we or shouldn't we? Or do we just paint a nice picture because the rest is left to Allah, is left to them to discuss it and disclose it? How would you deal with something like that? If you were
I think
asked to sort of,
it's a very
give a
natural thing to
character.
do. Yeah, it's a very
Okay.
natural thing to do. I mean, I guess you'll see it in some cultures more than other. But I mean, let me ask you: if you go to buy a car, are you going to check the service history? You know, are you going to check to see if it's a Cat C or a Cat D? Has it been involved in an accident before? Of course you are. But the fundamental difference here is that you could go in with a view to find out only what's wrong without finding out actually, this car handles really well. You know, it's got good fuel consumption. It's got all these facilities. So if you can do it for a car, if you can have a balanced view, and if you can keep an eye out for that person's positive characteristics, what they're achieving, what they're contributing, how they are now, then actually you're going to have a much more balanced perspective, and you'll be able to work with some of the mistakes that someone may have made much more effectively than, if you're only listening out for the negative things. But, as part of
Absolutely.
a responsible due diligence, if you know that someone is continuing to engage in, negative behaviors or habits that could be detrimental in a marriage, then I would suggest that you don't have to be explicit about what that behavior is, but that you could indicate that actually this isn't something you would recommend highly.
Mm. So you would be quite honest. Yeah, no, of course, because it's a future, it's someone's life. It's someone's, reliance on you saying something to point them in that direction. And there's also trust between the two people that are talking about the other person. And it's not to highlight their good and bad, but also to, say like, should we pursue this or should we look deeper? So yeah, I like that approach. I think it's really important because, we've all been asked to a certain extent if we know somebody or there's a good friend and, we want to know, but we might know more as a family, knowing that person growing up as to, what they've been through in life and, are they a good fit for your daughter or for your son? I think that is so important to address. I never thought of this kind of questioning before, and it's so relevant in relationships. How do you feel that, you've obviously got children, maybe they're much younger now, but do you think you personally would want to know as much detail as possible for your children's spouses?
Now, I mean, brilliant question, because like my daughters are teenagers. Within the next 10, 15 years or whatever, I'm sure I'm going to be in that position. And in response to your question, I want to acknowledge that there's a human side of me that, I love juicy gossip and, I want those details, but actually which part of my nafs is demanding those details? And actually, how interested am I in understanding what are the positive characteristics of this person? Who are they now rather than who they were? What are they going to do, with regard to their respect for my daughter, with their respect for me? How am I going to, judge them on what they're sharing with me now, while being cognizant that actually maybe they've done bad things, how have they reformed from those? And I
Yeah.
think that trust makes a huge difference, and certainly from some of my own personal experience and experience.
Well, we will be coming back, Doctor. I'm sorry to cut you off because we have got our final break and we are going to come back onto the final part of the show. It has been absolutely amazing to listen so far. And inshallah, we will have a few more questions for our doctor tonight. And please do join us for the last part in a few moments, where we'll be having a very short break. And inshallah, we will see you in a few moments. See you shortly. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Single Muslim Live here on British Muslim TV, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com. We're here on the final part of the episode. It's gone so quickly, but there's been such amazing gems that has been shared tonight, so that you have a much clearer idea of how you can move forward in a relationship, especially if you are coming from a past that you're not happy about yourself. So how do you share that with your partner? And how do you even cope with that when you are entering into a new relationship, regardless of your status? So we were talking before the break about, when we discussed that, it shouldn't be too detailed, or it should be detailed regardless. But when you are parents, you obviously, you want to make sure that you look after your child, and you want to, make sure that you protect them. So it's very difficult to not get that information. However, in today's day and age, a lot of people overshare because of social media. So you don't even have to go so far, and you don't even have to go and ask for character sort of like, witnesses and references, because I think people sometimes don't realize that, everything is online. What do you think and feel about that, and how good or bad could that actually be?
I mean, like in a way, it can be really positive because it helps to hold yourself accountable and makes you think, hang on, before I do this, I know this is going to be captured. I mean, can I be geotagged in this location? Where is that going to come up on my feed somewhere? When I post a picture, is it going to say, "Oh, you were actually in this location where you shouldn't have been"? So, if that can be, a helpful preventative motivation for sticking to your values, then that's a great thing.
Mhm.
Now, it doesn't always fit like that. We're not always, we always don't have that presence of mind. And I think what is worth doing is, as a tool for your own reflection, is just type your name in on Google, put it in a search engine, see where you come up. What are your videos? What are your comments? What are the things you're involved in? Where are you? What's your presence? And just, I mean, you may or may not be able to tidy that up. And that's not really the point here. I think the point is more about making sense and reflecting and learning from that. Because if that's going to be available for someone else to have a look at, and trust me, one of the first things that most people I know that are looking into a relationship do is Google you. Yeah. And if you're not doing it, you're behind the curve. Yeah, this is what everyone does, and it's a legitimate and sensible thing to do. But when you go onto it, think about how you would like to be judged. When someone's looking for you, when you're looking for someone else, are you going into judgment mode, or are you able to acknowledge that, okay, you know what, this person may have considered what's going on, may not have considered going on. What's their reality? Let me discuss it with them. That doesn't mean that I'm just going to open myself up to them, making up an excuse for everything and being gullible. But it does say, you know what, let me give them a chance. If I trust that I'm smart enough, then I'll be able to smart enough to figure out if they're continuously BSing me. Yeah, if there's a theme or a pattern in everything I ask them, or if they're able to help me understand that, this was the context, that they're reflective of it, they may be remorseful of it, then let me use that as a chance to say, you know what, actually, I trust this person that when they make a mistake,
Mhm.
they're not going to be defensive about it. It says something about their character, about how they respond to it. So check
But I
out
think it also
how you
depends.
respond.
It does depend. Yeah, it's so true. We can just Google everyone nowadays, but it does depend as well, because when you're in a relationship to begin with, you want to give that person that chance, and you're looking with like, lovely rose tinted glasses most of the time as well, and you don't want to see even the red flags. So we have to be really careful how we judge people and be realistic when we are looking, because as we go along into a relationship, as I mentioned before, these things can come up. And when you're actually judging and analyzing a person's character over time, and just say they're pulling away after a few years, or they have changed their character, then you start reminiscing about that person from their past, and you're like, have they really changed? Have they really moved on? Because a lot of the times, a lot of the people that when they've made mistakes in their past, and unfortunately I've experienced that myself, when they've done something in the past, it's the same reason that you actually fail, in that relationship, because they haven't actually dealt with it. They either become their parents and cheat, or they've done it before and you've given them a sort of like a pass for it, but then they've done it again because they've gotten away with it, or you've given them that chance. So again, like, it's something which is really, really difficult to actually handle. So how would you, again, comes back to the balance. It's not about even knowing the person's past, but how would you judge a real character as to whether or not they've worked on themselves, whether or not you can judge them, instead of just having that feeling on saying, oh, I'm going to give them a pass. What do you look out for in that person to see that they've actually made transformation in themselves and worked on themselves?
I mean, like some people can really talk the talk, real sweet, real nice. And,
Yes.
without making it too much of an interview, but acknowledging that actually this needs a serious response is
Mm.
to, demand examples of where behaviors actually changed. How you say you've changed, where's the evidence of it? Where have you been tested for me to be able to see where this has changed? And not I mean, the reason this wouldn't be an interview or an interrogation is because you're prepared to do this on a two-way basis. You're prepared to be accountable as well as to hold someone to account.
But do you not think that sometimes when people show who they are before, it is something that, that really does play out, just like how when you have been brought up in a certain particular parenting style and you have that sort of like reflection because that's the sponge that you've been sort of absorbing your entire life at the very beginning, then that shows who you are. So unless you go through some sort of self-development or you actually hit a brick wall, do you not think a lot of those people that come with those pasts are going to replay it, knowing psychology and behavior? What's your opinion on that?
Absolutely. And I think that's why when I talk about looking for evidence of change, it's telling me whether there's been reflection. And you can't spot if someone's reflected or not unless you're experienced and versed in reflecting yourself. So that's why I'm saying, this is part of our ethics. How can you expect anything of anyone else unless you're practicing it yourself? So acknowledge your own mistakes, how you've learned from it, how it's changed your behavior, and then it's perfectly reasonable to demand that of the person that you're wanting a commitment from and that you're willing to commit to.
How would you advise somebody who's moving on to a new relationship to actually deal with their past and move forward confidently so that they can, actually feel that transformation and for themselves and actually, build a trust with their future partner if they're coming with some real baggage?
I think not being defensive is huge. So, being able to be vulnerable, but knowing the sort of the right time to open up in more detail. I think it's perfectly fair enough to acknowledge that actually I haven't been an angel, but it's perfectly reasonable to say I don't feel ready at this early stage of the relationship to go into all the details, and I don't feel it's necessary to detail everything. But what I do think is necessary for me to do is to help you understand my reflections on how is it I got myself into that situation, what I've learned from it, and what has changed that will prevent this happening again. And
I think it's really important. As I was saying as well, I think if we use the example of reverts as well, I think that's a really good one, because I think a lot of the times we do either give ourselves a hard time or we give other people a hard time. And if we really truly understand our faith and know that people can change and they are willing to change and they make huge transformations, right? Especially if you're looking at a revert's life who has come from, complete difference. I'm not saying they all have had, whatever lifestyle, but it is a real transformation and they go through it quite painfully sometimes, even without the approval and losing and missing out communities. And I think that should give us some hope to know that, we should really understand, like you said, we are fallible, we make mistakes, and we should give people chances, but also be wise at the same time. So I think that was a good sort of like example to sort of see, because I think a lot of times we want it all nice and, sort of like fairy tale and, no mistakes and absolutely, crystal clear from a person, when even a person who is brought up with hardly many mistakes, they'd still have flaws and they're still capable. What's your thoughts
on that? How can you demand that when you're not that yourself?
Yes.
And if I could just add one point about the sort of the defensiveness, it's all very well to say don't be defensive and be open, but if the person interrogating you is making you feel defensive, it's really hard. So it's a two-way thing in a relationship, that approach it, ask them in a way that allows them to feel safe sharing, rather than being like, you know what, like there's an axe over your throat. Like the moment you say anything wrong, that's it, it's over.
Exactly.
And that, it's part of a journey. Someone says, I don't pray. Like there was a time where I just didn't pray and fast. Yeah. But actually I'm getting back on the road now. But you know what? If it happens that they don't pray for a day, is that it? Does that mean they've crossed a red line, the relationship's over? Or can you understand that actually it's part of a journey, and actually you can support them in that? And you both may vary and you'll be each other's support if you can start by modeling that earlier on.
Perfect. It's been an absolute pleasure having you tonight, Doctor. It's been so, so insightful and very informative. And I know that whoever's watching, they've definitely gained from it, because I certainly have. Are there any final thoughts as we do enter the end of the show? I really want to leave it with your last words, please.
Well, I'd just invite myself, first and foremost, and anyone who's watching and listening, to just review their own intention, review their own deeds, reflect on them, come to terms with them with your creator first, and then share with wisdom.
Oh, lovely. Beautiful message. And again, I'm so grateful to have you on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. I thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are, how much you do, and inshallah, you'll be blessed to continue with your work. And I really do hope that, people do watch the show. Thank you, everyone that's watching tonight. Thank you, Doctor, as well, for being with us, especially, and sharing all your knowledge. We do have the shows, honestly, because we just want to have and create better households and units, which is failing and breaking. And we just want to address as many issues from many angles, from different people, so that you can have the best information, from this channel, who is open and just here to serve you. Because, when you have amazing household and building communities, that's what builds our ummah. So inshallah, just keep those questions coming in, all those ideas. I do listen and watch, and I do appreciate you continuing to tune in and support the episode as well. I really do wish you a very good night, and inshallah, we'll be back next week with another topic and guest. Thank you so much for tonight, and have a wonderful evening. We will see you next week. Inshallah. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.